further ado, I will start. So, good morning in Mexico City. Good afternoon in the Netherlands. As you all know, today we're here to listen and to learn a little bit more about cultural differences between Mexico and the Netherlands. And Holland House is committed to supporting and sharing interesting information with the Netherlands business community. So today we have with us a very interesting speaker and work from John Hyatt. John Hyatt is an international business development professional who has spent the last 11 years in Mexico City assisting international firms with sourcing and market development projects in the United States, Latin America, and the Caribbean. And well, we wanted to work with him because he has true expertise in assisting international firms in Latin America, preventing them from making cultural mistakes that can be very costly for business. So without further ado, John, good morning. Thank you. I believe you're joining us from the US. So thanks for doing that, and thanks for your time.
Yes. Good morning, Misael. Yes, I'm in the US for the next few days visiting clients. But it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction.
And just so everybody knows, I mean, John will be doing the presentation, but feel free to open your mic, and if you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to ask them. And as well, at the end of the session, we'll have a Q&A period. So please, John. I think, do you want to share your screen? Or?
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And I think, as you said, I'm going to speak for about 20 to 30 minutes. I prefer kind of an open-ended. If you want to turn this into a dialogue conversation, that's perfectly fine. If people just want to raise their hands and kind of interject or interrupt or whatnot, especially if some people even have their own experiences from doing business in other regions or as well as in Mexico or other parts of LATAM, that's fine. And like you said, then we'll leave about 10 or 15 minutes for a follow-up, no? Or for Q&A at the end.
Perfect.
Okay. Yes, to give you guys a little bit of background on me, as Misael said, I've actually been in Mexico City since 2008 in and out. And have been working almost exclusively over the past several years on manufacturing nearshoring. I'm a part of a group of companies called the Mexico Strategic Sourcing Alliance, and we essentially assist Western firms, mostly Western firms, with setting up manufacturing nearshoring in Mexico and the rest of LATAM, which is obviously a large trend with what's going on specifically between the West and China right now. Now I'm gonna use a couple of manufacturing examples today, but I think the idea is we're gonna focus more on business cultural differences today. And as Misael and I have agreed, we're gonna do a later webinar in in September, that is more specifically focused on the nearshoring process and how to set up shop in Mexico for Western firms. So I want to just start by just asking a question, and if people would like to kind of answer guesses, like I said, we can have kind of an open dialogue. Why do firms fail when doing business in Mexico? In Mexico or the rest of LATAM, but we're specifically focused on Mexico today. Why? Because a lot of companies come to us, and a lot of companies come to Holland House, and they say, look, we tried to set up distribution in Mexico, or we went to a trade show in Guadalajara or Mexico City or Monterrey, and we thought things were going to move forward, and they just didn't for this, that, or other reason. Does anybody have any ideas? And like I said, you can raise your virtual hand or can interject. Why do a lot of Western firms, specifically Western firms, since we're all Westerners here, why do they often fail when trying to do business in Mexico?
Well, in my opinion, they failed to make real contact with Mexican people. I've been doing business now for a few years in Mexico, and before you get the business, you first have to be a friend, more or less.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Martine, and thank you so much for bringing that in there. And I'm going to talk about that later in this presentation. Not only do you have to be a friend, but you got to get to the business owner, and that's something that us as Westerners, it just, you know, I was visiting clients earlier this over the past week and a half in the United States, and I wasn't with any business owner. They were larger firms, and I was with managers and VPs who were signing contracts, who were writing checks, who were signing off on budgets, on travel expenses for us and our partners. That doesn't happen in Mexico. The owner is the only one who is going to sign off on that, unless it's a very large multinational. So I'm really glad you brought that up, and we're going to get more into it. Does anybody else have any other ideas? It's fine. So we'll go ahead and move on. So I want to talk about, ask another question. You know, high context versus low context cultures. Carlos Correa, who's an American PhD, who I co-authored our book with on the business culture in Mexico. Carlos spent an entire chapter writing about, you know, high context versus a low context culture. Does anyone know what culture the Netherlands is? They're really, according to a lot of, quote, culturalists, there are only two types of cultures in the world: high context or low context, with at least with regard to business in this sense. Does anyone know what type of culture the Netherlands is and what type of culture Mexico is? I'll give you a hint. They're not the same one. So I'll move on. So Mexico and Latin America are what are called high context cultures, and us in the West, in Western Europe, Canada, the United States. When you get into Western Europe now, when we talk about Italy, Spain, and Portugal and France, it gets a little bit nebulous there, because they're Western, but they're still Latin cultures. But in a sense, kind of what Martine was saying, a high context culture is one in which people value relationships. People value relationships more, and nonverbal communication means more, as is in a country like Mexico. As Martine said, if they want to be your friend first prior to doing business with you. I've worked with Scandinavians who are not my friends. That won't work that way in Mexico. And a low context culture, as is Western Europe, as I said, the States, Canada, you know, things are more about substance. Things are more about, you know, what are the numbers on the table? How fast can this move along? Talking about speed, I want to move into the next slide. And yes, in low context cultures, things move faster. In high context cultures, like a Latin American country like Mexico, things are going to take more time. I cannot overemphasize that enough with clients. And back answering our first question, okay. Why do countries fail? Why do firms fail in a country like Mexico? From our experience in manufacturing, I would say one of the primary problems is the difference of time. When people want things to be set up as fast as they were set up in China, it's simply not going to happen. And not only are you not going to set up a manufacturing supply chain as fast as you did in China, if a Dutch firm wants to set up a distribution with a Mexican retailer or a Mexican distributor, it's not going to happen as fast as it happens in the UK or Germany or the United States. It simply takes more time. Going back to what Martin said specifically with regards to in-person meetings, face-to-face time, we always tell our clients that if you do not meet them in person, they will not do business with you. I'll give you a quick example. I used to teach, and I think I've told this story to Misael. I used to teach international business at the Tec de Monterrey, which is where Misael studied, which is kind of the Harvard of Mexico. I know I'm getting a smile from Misael. And I used to teach international business there, and I pulled up one day, every semester, I would pull up one of my contracts and I would show my contracts to the students, and I would obviously redact confidential information for my clients and all of that. And I would say, look, we closed this last week or last month. We closed this on Zoom. This client was in Montana or Iowa or Texas or Alabama or wherever. And, we never even met him. We're going to meet him in Mexico. But, this was, for a several $1,000 contract. And the kids literally started yelling at me in class and were like, John, stop lying. You are just this lying American kid. There's no way, no one would. And they started cussing at me a little bit, which I thought was funny. And they said, there's no way that anyone would send money without meeting them. And I said, yes, we met each other on Zoom and Teams, and we signed the contract virtually, and it was done like that. And they literally, from a cultural standpoint, they could not believe that money changed hands just in a virtual format, because it just does not happen in Latin America. They are going to have to meet you in person in any type of B2B endeavor. Now, you want to buy something online or something like that. Yeah, obviously that can be done virtually, but business to business, where there are going to be thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars, it's going to be done in person. You can get a relationship started on Zoom and WhatsApp, but you're going to have to meet them. And as Martin said, they're gonna, it's a relationship-based culture. Business owners are going to want to get to know you. They're going to want to get to like you. And they're going to basically want to be your friend prior to doing business with you. And we tell clients all the time, if they do not know you and like you, they will not do business with you, period. It doesn't matter how thick your pocketbooks are. It doesn't matter how much money you're willing to throw on the table. If a LATAM business owner does not feel comfortable with you in a personal sense, he or she will not do business with you. Misael, you wanted to add something?
Yeah. So, I mean, I find very interesting what you're mentioning, but just looking at what you were saying about time differences, because that's something that I've heard from interacting with many Dutch companies that come to Mexico. So I have two questions. Maybe you can add on a little bit on the time differences. So how long do you think it takes on average to close a deal, or the difference between what you said, like in the US, you would expect your first client to come, I don't know, after 2 months, 1 month, 6 months. And in Mexico, how much longer does it take? Do you have that type of comparison that you can share? And the other one is, does it matter that it is so the culture in Mexico, we know that maybe the government is not as business friendly as in other parts of the world. Right. Does it have to do with government versus private, or it takes longer, whether if it's private companies, governments, like everything takes longer when doing business in Mexico? Just wanted to ask those two questions.
Okay, yeah, those are really good questions, Misael. So, and actually, I'm going to turn it into three. So your first question, is there like an average on how long controlling for everything the same deal would take in a Western European country or the United States as opposed to Mexico? I've never really researched that to have those numbers. I would say at least double or triple the time if I just had to guess. But the other things that you brought up with the government, that's one of those. I'm glad you mentioned that, because those are some of the reasons that things take longer. It's not all because, we need to be careful about stereotypes about, well, all the Mexicans want to do is just sit around and drink tequila with you for 3 or 4 weeks and get to know you prior to making a decision. That's kind of ridiculous. People can get to know you after, one business breakfast, a nice business dinner, and then they're ready to start talking numbers. It's not like it takes, a month of dinners that are 3 or 4 visits. Now it can depend on the deal, but as I said, all things being equal, I would say it takes double, or it can usually take 2 to 3 times. But from our experience, with what you said with the government, that's actually one of the reasons that things take so long, because we work with Mexican factories all the time where they are going to need a new certification for our client to be able to get something in the United States, whether it's a UL certification or an ISO or something like that. And it may take, or specifically with Mexican government certifications, there's a Mexican government certification called the EMEX, which means if a Mexican factory imports a component from another country, as long as that component goes into an exported product, it doesn't have to pay. They're not responsible for paying taxes for that, for tariffs or value added tax for that product. And if you want to set up manufacturing in Mexico, in many cases, it's very important that your manufacturer has that certification. Well, with the Mexican government, that certification can literally sometimes take years, depending on where the factory is. And we're dealing with several projects specifically with the EMEX right now. So things take longer, but a lot of times you can kind of blame the Mexican government. The other thing that's kind of the third aspect of this time thing that I want to get into is, if things take longer in Mexico, just from a cultural standpoint, from distributor A or supplier A, if they're having to do business with other suppliers and other distributors, multiply that time on, because it kind of compounds. So it's not all one business owner's fault because of his or her way of doing things. The other thing is liquidity. They do not have liquidity Mexican firms do not have the same amount of liquidity that specifically American or other Western firms have. I can go to the bank here. I get emails almost on a weekly basis here in the States from American Express and from Chase Bank, offering me a several $100,000 business line of credit for my company. That doesn't happen in Mexico. That doesn't happen. To get credit and liquidity in general is just far less common, and you have to jump through lots of hoops and lots of original documents and applications to be able to get credit. So a lot of firms, it's just a question of, specifically in supply chain or distribution, they may not have the credit or the liquidity to be able to move forward as fast as you want. And that's another big thing when setting up sales and distribution. Firms are going to ask you for most of the time, terms are going to be on the table, because again, there's not that liquidity, but terms are on the table in all countries. People always want terms when doing big B2B distribution or manufacturing. But thanks for those questions, Misael. I think they were really helpful. And to move into the negotiation culture, things are face-to-face with regard to negotiation. And also, I'm going to get into another slide about this. Not only are they face-to-face, but generally, specifically in our industry, you're going to have to do multiple rounds. I have a call with a company in the Midwest later today, actually an hour after this webinar. We spoke Friday. He sent me his information. I'm going to get on a 20-minute call with him and negotiate our final fees. Okay. Again, that's not going to happen in Mexico. They're not going to negotiate with you like that, one, over Zoom in most cases, and two, it's going to require multiple rounds. It's going to require multiple rounds and a lot of back and forth. Think of the Arabic negotiation culture. And I always say, Mexico has a plethora of Lebanese immigrants that I, in many ways, think influenced that culture, where it is a far more back and forth negotiation culture. And again, it's probably going to require some dinner and some get to know you, like Martin said. Final couple things I just want to hit on. If you're wanting to do business, and I don't think anyone here has this mindset, because otherwise you wouldn't be on this call. But if you're wanting to say you're going to do business the same way you do it in Amsterdam or London or Berlin or New York, and you just get we've gotten this on several occasions. It was people contact us for one thing or another. They said, I had the exact same model that I used in Europe and in the United States, and that's exactly what I'm going to use in Mexico. Those are really short phone calls for us, because we tell them we can't help them. And in many ways, their same, quote, distribution model could be violation of Mexican federal law for certain things, for not having the right certifications. And sometimes American firms tell us, or American independent contractors tell us they don't care, that they're going to do things their way. And we simply tell them they can't help us. We simply tell them that we can't help them. So if you're going to have that type of mindset, it's probably best to just stay in the Eurozone, or to do business, or for American firms to just continue doing business in the States. And the final thing is, it's going to take more budget, as I said, time, but it's going to take more budget, and the fact that it's a face-to-face culture in Mexico, and the fact that, it's going to require several in-person meetings. If you don't have any type of budget or ability to travel, or to hire reps, or to hire firms that can rep for you, it's going to be very difficult. I'm not saying that you can't set up a solid distribution in Mexico or the rest of LATAM off of a couple of calls and one visit. I mean, it can happen, but the chances are going to be very much against you. So to move on, and I think we've got about 10 more minutes and I'll finish. I want to talk about, what goes on within Mexico. Is Mexico the same country everywhere? I know the Netherlands is a rather small country. I don't know a ton about the Netherlands. Are things the same in Amsterdam as they are in more rural regions? Probably not. And one of my favorite movies from the early 2000s with Reese Witherspoon was Sweet Home Alabama, where if any of you remember, she was this uppity New York girl who was she was actually from Alabama and was marrying the son of New York's mayor, who the mayor was played by Candice Bergen. And so she went down to get divorced from her first marriage, and she looked at her father, who was walking out to the Civil War reenactment, dressed up in a Confederate uniform, and she rolled her eyes and she said, people should need a passport to come back down here. And I always laugh, because the States is really that way. And we mentioned that in our book, that, I don't do business with clients in Wyoming the same way that I do business with people in New York or Los Angeles. People in New York or Los Angeles, a 15-minute call would take 30 minutes with someone from Wyoming or Alabama. There's more of, actually, in the rural areas of the United States, it's more of a Latin American type of culture where they want to get to know you, specifically, especially in agricultural industries. Farmers are notorious for wanting those in-person meetings and wanting to get to know you. Well, Mexico's not that much different from the US in that sense. And I think, so many people, specifically here in the United States, they feel like because of not just regional differences, but differences amongst industries and education levels. You know, people tell us, well, you know, we have Mexicans that cut our grass in the United States, or our son, we go to the Mexican restaurant over here a couple of times a week. And I really do get these comments from people, or we, you know, our cleaning lady is Mexican, or my son works on a construction crew my son works on or manages a construction crew, and most of those are Mexican. So we understand the Mexican culture. I mean, that's absolutely ridiculous, folks, that you feel like you understand, that you think that a Mexican waiter at a Mexican restaurant, or a woman from a rural region of Mexico who probably has an 8th grade education, who's cleaning your house, is going to have the exact same culture and way of doing business as a vice president of a company in Monterrey or Guadalajara who studied a semester in the United States. I mean, that's absurd. I mean, someone like Misael, who studied at an international university in Mexico, to think that he has the exact same mindset and way of doing business and negotiation culture as someone who cuts your grass in Texas. That's absurd. But people think that way. And regionally, the differences, not only are there tons of differences based on education level and industry. Northern Mexico is far more westernized, folks. Things do move faster in northern Mexico, specifically with regards to manufacturing. As we say in Spanish, son trabajadores. They don't need as many in-person meetings. They don't want to get to know you as well as someone in another part of Mexico, as say Guadalajara. The further south you go into Mexico, the more the culture is, you know, high context, as we would say. The more it is like the rest of Latin America, the more relationships are going to be valued, and the more time things are going to take. I do a lot of business in Jalisco. In Guadalajara, things run very slowly. Even though it's a major industrialized city, Guadalajara is a very conservative society. Things are people are set in their ways. They're open to doing business with foreigners. They're not prejudiced against foreigners, but you're going to do things their way and at their pace. Okay. So just to finish up, a couple of things.
John, just a quick question, because you mentioned, I think, a topic that is interesting for a couple of people
Sure.
in the audience. You mentioned farmers, and here in Mexico, do you find that, like in the agribusiness sector, is that something that you see that it takes longer, or they want to build relationships? Is that something that you see different as in manufacturing, or it's just Mexican culture and not necessarily farmers or agricultural or agribusiness sector culture? Have you seen any cases, or can you refer to?
Well, yeah, I've worked in agriculture. I've worked in fruit export to the United States, and they definitely want to get to know you, probably the same as in manufacturing. My point with farmers is, I think in the West, farmers are far more, people in agriculture are far more slow. Like I gave the example of a rancher in Wyoming or a farmer in Alabama. You know, that what may close via Zoom down here in Charlotte, that rancher in Wyoming or farmer in Alabama is going to want to get to know me in person. So I think on a Western context, farmers are far more conservative in that sense and wanting to meet you in person, people in agriculture. But in Mexican agriculture, absolutely, they absolutely are going to want in-person meetings. And I would say, if you're getting into the agriculture business in Mexico, it is even it's going to be far more low tech than you're used to. And people are going to be far more, I don't want to say stubborn, but people are going to be far more doing things the way they were done decades ago, as opposed to perhaps in a country like the Netherlands. So I think you would want to be prepared for a trip back to the old school, I would say.
I was going to ask that question because we are preparing to go with a training business for farmers into Mexico. So I was going to ask you that. What do you think? Would they be open, or would it take a lot of effort?
They're going to be open to learn, but I think, you're going to have to speak to their culture. It's like Nelson Mandela said in that famous quote, when you speak to a man in his second language, you speak to his mind. When you speak to a man in his first language, you speak to his heart. And I'm not specifically talking about language here, although you are going to need to be speaking in Spanish, but I think you're going to need to come up with cultural contexts and connections to be able to connect with them and get them on board, as opposed to you just a Dutch company coming in to show them how to use showing them how to use your software or your equipment or whatnot, whatever it is. We could talk about that after the call. I mean, Misael has my contact info, but there are definitely, and Holland House has people who have worked specifically with agriculture. And I know people who have Mexicans who have exported to Holland through Holland House or affiliated with Holland House. So there are people. There are those of us who you can talk to who can help you with that, but I think you will definitely need to come up with a strategy to where you can break through those cultural differences. And a lot of it could have to do with food and drink, just so you don't come across as, the next slide I'm looking at here, are Westerners rude. Sometimes Mexicans feel that we're rude in the West, and we're really not. We're just more direct and to the point. So I don't know. Does that answer your question?
I think the key point is, at least that's what I've experienced, is that you do not impose things on people,
right?
But you're open to, how can I help you? Or I think it's, but that's also, I think, in many businesses in other countries as well, because you first have to connect and find out what do you need before you can impose something on someone. But
right.
I think in Mexico, that's even more the case.
Right. And it will be even more the case in agriculture as well, because again, they're more accustomed to doing things the way they do them. I mean, again, I use the example of Alabama. I mean, people in Alabama here in the States, especially in the rural areas, they're more isolated from, globalization and modernity, just as are people in the rural areas. And they're going to be more accustomed to doing things their way. So I think you're already on the right track, as you said, to not come in imposing, acting like, you're the know-it-all. So, and okay, so finishing up, I already went over Westerners rude, concepts of time. As I said, Martine did a great job talking about, what the value of relationships. And the final thing, don't get annoyed. And, as Janik was discussing, I hope I didn't mispronounce your name. Don't get annoyed by the fact that things may need to move slower in the Mexican countryside, or that, I don't know the specifics of what you're doing, or that, farmers come into a training, or agricultural people, and they're just, they seem far more relaxed and laid back and less businesslike, which, very much may be the case, but you just can't get annoyed by that. Just as, I gave a webinar a couple of years ago to Americans about the role of women in Mexican business culture, and amongst men and women, we walk into offices in Mexico City and we kiss each other on the cheek. I do that in the United States, I'm going to be fired, and I'm going to be in court, for sexual harassment, and I'm going to be all over the news. it's nothing, it's not right or wrong. It's just different. So if you just notice and accept the differences, then, you know, you've won half the battle. So, and again, talking about, I want to talk a little bit about negotiation protocol, specifically with business to business. Things are very drawn out. If you're selling a product or service into Mexico, I would almost, a LATAM firm is going to expect you to come in way above what you're going back to that Arabic business culture. They're going to be expecting you to come in much higher than you would, than you're willing to take. You know, we often send our quotes to American firms where we may go down 15% or something like that. Okay, Misael, you can't put this on YouTube anymore.
Okay.
You know, there's a very small window in the United States, and we often just basically quote what we're asking in the United States with regards to our fees to our clients or to Canada. And often they don't, I would say 8 out of 10 times, they don't even ask us for a lower rate or a lower fee for us as consultants. They say, yes, we'll take that, or no. That's not the way it works. There's going to be back and forth unless you come in so high that things are gonna, you're just going to scare them away. And that's another conversation. But be prepared to come in higher if you're selling a product or service. If you're like us in manufacturing, nearshoring, Mexican firms are never gonna quote you initially anything close to what they want or what they will finally take. I mean, we've had bids come in on initial rounds of manufactured product 500% higher than the final price that we've negotiated. Literally, I mean, we had a project last year where the piece price started at $132 and the final price was $18 for the same product. I mean, that is a ridiculous concept in our mindsets. You know, why would you waste so much time and energy going back and forth? But again, just like I said, with the cookie cutter approach, with the people who are saying, I will do things the exact same way I did them, you know, in the UK. If you're going to come in with that approach, you're setting yourself up for failure. Okay. Always, please don't look desperate. Specifically in our case, in what we do, you know, you need to hold your ground. Don't respond immediately when you're negotiating, especially, you know, after in-person meetings, things can often switch to email a little bit. You know, they are becoming more westernized in certain industries, but you know, if you quote a $1,000 piece price for something and then they come back 800, you know, don't respond that day. Let them think about it. Let them sit on it. And that's general negotiation protocol across a lot of cultures. Don't look desperate. And one of the things that we often tell our clients is don't fly to Mexico immediately. You know, initial meetings can come on Zoom. And if they want to meet with you in person, that's fine. But don't get on the plane the next week or the next month. When our clients come to Mexico too early, they lock themselves out of lower pricing because that Mexican supplier, that factory owner sees, okay, they're in trouble with China, they're in trouble with tariffs, they're in trouble with supply chain. We had a Zoom meeting and 2 weeks later, they rearranged their schedule to come down here and be on my factory floor and see me. I can get more out of this. And, you know, not wanting to sound ethnocentric, but the LATAM business culture is still a lot of a short-term mindset. Again, it's starting to change to more about long-term partnerships, but there is still the mindset of how much can I get right now? If you look desperate, you're not going to get you're going to be leaving money on the table, whether you're buying or selling. Okay. And again, I talked about decision-making. Just a little bit about manufacturing culture as a teaser for our next webinar in September. I know some of you may not really care about this. people looking to buy finished product, notoriously the way American firms want to buy finished product, the way they do in the Canton Fair. That just doesn't exist in Mexico. That there's no real culture of IP theft in Mexico the way there is in China. Factories just do not have the overall capacity that they do in Asian countries, or the efficiency. Doesn't mean you can't get competitive pricing, but it's going to be a different process, and suppliers are going to require more development. The last point I had there, they're going to require far more development than they do in an Asian country or to contract manufacture in another Western country. So, okay, that is it. I hope I didn't take too much time, or am I right around our cutoff?
No, it's perfect, John. Thank you. I think you have touched upon many interesting points. I don't know if somebody in the audience, I mean, now we can move on to Q&A if somebody has any other questions, any comments on what John said. Maybe in your experience, you have faced different things or similar things. If somebody can or wants to share, now would be the time. So feel free and feel free to join and to share.
I have a question
Yeah.
related to the cultural difference, or how important would it be for us as companies to have ambassadors in Mexico? So a couple of people that really like what you do, and would that help?
Yeah, anything
to have a friend of a friend, or so to say, or
what? But what do you mean? Can you give me a hypothetical to where you just you have someone on the ground? You're not saying hire someone. You're just saying like more of a network in Mexico.
Yes. For example, we have been to Mexico a couple of weeks ago. I've met some interesting people at the Congress, and they say, I really like what you do. Maybe I can find some business for you, or would that be like they do it because they like you, or would they also would like to earn something from that, or how would you see that?
Well, I think someone who told you, I really like what you do, I'd like to find some business, I think they're trying to get some money out of it as well.
Okay.
Most likely they just might not have told you that. Now, do they want some type of commission contract with you, want some type of retainer with you, or a combination of the both? I don't know. Remember, but that's interesting, what you just brought up, and going back to the cultural differences. And communication is very indirect in Mexico. And I would say of the Latin American countries, probably Ecuador, Peru, and Mexico are the least direct with regard to communication. They were basically saying to you, I want you to hire me, or I want you to retain me, without asking you for money right there. That's the way. Misael, you're Mexican. Is that the way you would interpret it?
Maybe yes. It depends on, maybe they want to gain something, not necessarily you to hire them or money, but it represents a benefit for them to do what they are offering you to do. But John is right. We won't tell that straight away, like, oh, I want to gain something from helping you. That's why I'm helping you. So that's not something that we would say as Mexicans.
Yeah, and again, I'm so glad you brought that up, Janeke, because with the cultural, that's a perfect cultural example of how they probably, those individuals or that individual wants to meet you on Zoom and probably wants to sit down for lunch with you at the next time you're in Mexico, or if they happen to be in the Netherlands, and that individual wants to really get to know you and smell you out, and you smell them out. The Mexicans use that term. I say we were sniffing each other out the other night at dinner. I've heard people say that down there. So that's probably what that means. And honestly, you're probably not going to find out until you at least get on a Zoom with them. I mean, it's not going to be a cultural concept situation where you email them and say, yes, what can you do for me? You're going to have to, if you're back in the Netherlands, you're going to have to at least do a video call.
Yes. Well, that's what I actually did. And there are also some people coming over to the Netherlands in a couple of weeks. So, but the funny thing is that then I told them, I said, well, okay, if you can find business for me or whatever, then we would also have to talk about maybe a compensation for you. And they were like, oh, okay. So maybe I was a little bit too direct, but I don't know, because I think it always has to be a win-win situation. So that's also in my culture of negotiating. Maybe they were surprised, I don't know, but
well, I'm interested to see how this ends up. Yeah, especially since they're coming over in the following weeks. Drop me. I'd love for you, even if you don't feel like you need to talk with me specifically, I'd love for you to drop me a note on LinkedIn or an email. I'm interested in how this pans out.
Yes. Okay, I will.
Perfect. Perhaps, Martin, please.
Yeah, I also have a question. I have some experience in doing business in Mexico, and from there I tried to go to the US, and I found out that going direct to the US with containers of goods, plastic packaging material, to be specific, is very complicated because of the logistical hubs in the harbors. Mm-hmm. And so somebody told me that maybe there's a possibility to make it easier by going through Mexico. So going to Veracruz and then up with the trucks. Do you have any experience with that?
I mean, we're kind of logistics experts in what we do. Although I'm not specifically in logistics. I've heard of that. I mean, there are companies that do that, but there are very few cases where it ends up being cost effective after getting it in and paying all of the, I mean, I don't think you would pay import duties, but it would depend on your product, and then shipping things up through Laredo or wherever it would be. Where can I ask you, where are you trying to bring it in the United States?
Well, in the end, it has to go to the north of the United States. But it's going to be a packaging material for dairy, and there are some different hubs so also in the south of the US. That's what I'm looking for. What was it? Of Alabama. So it's not so far from the Mexican border.
But are you shipping from the Netherlands?
Yeah, to Mexico, and then well, that's going quite good. But we cannot come into the US because there's no it's very complicated to get everything on time because of the logistic troubles in the US. It's not only getting it into the harbor and getting the container through the customs, but also getting the right transport on time for the right money to go to the customer.
And have you looked at other ports here on the East Coast, the smaller ports?
Yeah, many ports. Yeah, New York,
Wilmington, North Carolina. They're expanding the port in Savannah, Georgia. Mm-hmm. I'm just brainstorming. I'm no expert on Europe to US trade, but I would think there has to be a better way than moving it through Mexico. I think if you move it through Mexico, you're going to have more problems and more costs. That's my guess.
All right. Well, it's not about cost directly, but it's more about reliability.
Okay. And you've looked at New Orleans and all the Florida ports and everything.
Yeah. You never know when the customs going to clear the container, and that's okay. We have good experience with Veracruz, for instance. That's no issue.
Okay, so you have done things through Veracruz.
Yeah, many times.
Maybe it is your best option. I know people who have done things like that, specifically from Asia to the Mexican ports like Manzanillo and then shipped it up to the United States. But in most of those cases, and we've worked those projects, they're doing some type of final assembly in Mexico where they're putting final pieces onto something.
Okay.
So it's a little bit, so it's not like it's just going through Mexico.
No, that's different. Yeah.
But please share your email with me and I will talk around to a couple of partners and see if I have at least advice or people that you could talk to.
All right. Your email is somewhere.
I can share the contact information.
Sure.
So
Share my
yeah,
contact information with John.
perfect. Okay,
Thank you very
great.
much.
And if everybody is okay, I mean, I will share John's email with everybody that listed for the webinar. And I think if nobody else has a question, then I'm going to go ahead and first, thank you, John, for your time, for sharing your experience, expertise, and knowledge on this topic that is very important for Holland House Mexico, and it's very important for us to open this type of discussions, this type of forums. As you said, we're looking forward to next sessions. So thank you as well to the audience for connecting. I know there's some time difference in the Netherlands. We try to make it business time, business friendly time. So hopefully it's not very late for you there. I think it's around 5:30 p.m. So I think it's good for end of business day. So I will share with everybody John's contact information, because I think it would be of use for you to get going the conversation, and maybe something can develop from there. So thank you very much, and have a good rest of your day.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Misael.
Wonderful.
And thank you, John.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you as well.